Welcome everyone to our talk about the Painting Deconstructed exhibition at the Tacoma Art Museum. My name's Amelia Layton. I'm the Public Programs Manager at the museum. And before we start, I just wanted to acknowledge that the Tacoma Art Museum is located on the homelands of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. We recognize and honor the Puyallup people and Coast Salish communities who have endured so much so that we can all thrive here today. Thank you for being here. I want to start off by introducing Margaret Bullock, who is our Chief Curator and Curator of Collections and Special Exhibitions at the Tacoma Art Museum. She holds an MA in Anthropology from Washington State University and an MA in Art History from the University of Oregon, and her specialty is late 19th and early 20th century art, with particular focus on the Pacific Northwest. Thank you for being here. Oh, and I should say I am a painter, and I am also an educator here at the Art Museum, and I get to do all these fun programs like talks and lectures and community festivals and stuff like that. And I've seen some raised hands, and if you can put your questions in the Q&A box, which is down at the bottom of your screen, you should see some options for Q&A and chat. And you can also put comments in the chat box, and we'll try to keep track of those throughout the show. So there'll also be specific time for Q&A at the end. So if we don't get to your question right away, just know that we'll try to answer it at the end. So I'll pass it over to Margaret to give a rundown of what this exhibition is.
Yeah, so we have, first of all, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday afternoon to come hang out with us and talk about painting. Amelia and I were trying to get this program together and kept wandering off into sidebar conversations, so we aren't sure how far we'll get, but we'll have a good time. So as a curator of collections, I'm responsible for making sure that we have a significant amount of the Northwest Permanent Collection on regular view. And we have one gallery in particular that we use for that. And I've done a number of shows out of the collection there that have been thematic or maybe chronological. And when it came time to organize a new one for this space, I thought it's like, I really just want to do something different. And a colleague of ours mentioned to me, it's like, I saw this great show that was focused on a single medium. And I thought, well, that would be so much fun to do that and see what we could do. And we have first, I'm an absolute geek for painting. I'm terrible at it. I'm not a painter. I've tried it. No matter how hard I try, it's terrible, but I love it. And we have an incredible collection of over 700 painters by Northwest artists. So it just seemed like the logical thing to do. And of course, ended up being very hard to choose. The first checklist I turned in, they had to come back to me twice to make me cut it down because I put too many paintings in the show. But what I love about it so much is the endless reinvention of it. It's like, I just feel like there's got to be a moment where people can't come up with anything new to do with painting, and then wham, there's something else new. So that's what I love about it. But I'm really glad you wanted to do this program together, Amelia, because as you say, you are a painter. So what is it about it that made you choose that as your primary medium?
That's a great question. I think it was just the first thing I knew that was art. Like as a child, I was like, oh, art is painting, because that's what you see when you look at like the masters or the Renaissance or Impressionism, those things that kind of everyone gets from childhood. And so then when I ended up in art school, you have a foundations year to try everything kind of. You learn the elements of art, which we'll be talking about today a little bit, and make sure everyone's on the same footing. And I tried video art, sculpture. I did printmaking for a while, but it feels very painterly. And nothing, I was always trying to paint. Like my sculpture teacher just was like, you want to be a painter. I don't know what you're doing. And my video art teacher was like, this isn't for you. Like, so it's always been painting, and it's turned into now like you said, it always is like you think you've done everything you can do with the medium and then you do something new. And I think that is true of when we make paintings. And I think it's definitely true in some of the paintings that we're going to look at today. So
Yeah, so the show, kind of picking up on that, the way I organized the show was, like you were saying, it's like people know painting. It's sort of like the art form when you first come to it often, that's the first one people know or even try. And it's so familiar, and we're so used to looking at paintings and thinking about them that there can be things you just kind of miss. And I love the whole sort of technical behind the scenes part of it, like how did that come to look that way? I'm always getting in trouble in museums because I'm leaning too close to the paintings and trying to figure out what was going on there. So that's how the show is. I thought, like, well, let's take a painting apart. That's, let's look at the sort of some of the major building blocks. So the sections are the medium and support, the composition, the color palette, and then the techniques that were used to apply the medium that was chosen. So that's how the exhibition's organized. But we've just chosen a group of our favorites from the exhibition that we just wanted to talk about them in particular and then kind of see where the conversation goes.
yeah. So I'm up first. And as an abstract painter, those of you that know me, it might be weird that I chose this landscape, but and one of the oldest paintings in the exhibition, right?
Yeah, it is the oldest, yeah.
Yeah. So it's undated, but sometime after 1884, which in art history for me was not nearly when things got interesting. But the thing I love about this painting, and I'm so excited to get to see it in person when we reopen in April, is the colors. There's some beautiful purple that I am drawn to that's in the mountains that really plays with this vibrant green and this bright orange that's in the front. And it's the classic thing that painters do with color, is that warm colors come forward when you look at them and colors recede. And so the depth that he got in this painting, and as a self-taught artist, that's pretty incredible. There's a style to what he's doing. So I don't know if this is exactly as it was the day he saw it, or if he embellished that and made that orange pop even further just to like give that depth. But there's something really beautiful about that. And the purple, if you just kind of squint and look at the purple across that horizon line, it's just so beautiful, and it becomes sort of abstracted in my brain. And that's kind of how I'm looking at it versus like, oh, mountains, water, trees. I start to see it as like colors that are just playing against each other.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, what I find fascinating about his work is he was trained originally as a lithographer, and so very much thinking in terms of line, line, line. And when he starts to paint, he's learning by looking at other people's work. And a lot of his paintings combine both those elements. So you'll find passages in it that feel sort of harder and more linear, and then you'll find these beautiful sort of soft landscapes. And what I loved about this picture was something unexpected in it, which is over to the left in the middle ground there, there's that exposed rock that's in these very particular kind of geometric shapes. And when this painting first came to our attention, it was someone had found it in a closet in a organization in Minneapolis, which is where Grafton Tyler Brown ended his life and his career. And they were trying to find out who he was and what this might be. And in looking at it, he spent a lot of time in the Northwest traveling around. He had a studio in Portland for a while. Yeah. And I thought, could this be a Northwest picture? Wouldn't that be amazing? Because his work is hard to find. And it was that geological formation on the left that was what sparked the real excitement for me, because I love and have spent a lot of time in the Columbia River Gorge, and I love anything to do with volcanic basalts. And that's a formation that's really common in the Columbia River. This is not a Minnesota landscape. And shared it with others from here, and we looked at the date of it and everything else, and we really believe it was one of the works he did here in the Northwest. So coming out of a closet in Minnesota, we ended up with the Columbia River scene. So I love it for its very traditional 19th century, that gorgeous color balance you're talking about. I'm a very symmetrical brain. I love things to be in balance like that, but it's those other little characteristics for me as a researcher that are exciting because it can get you somewhere unexpected. And we were able to put the date on it because of the change in his signature, which is also crazy. I don't know if people can see it on the slide. I've got the chat box open covering it, but you can kind of see. Anyway, you'd have to go look at what it looks like before, but we know his signature changed. He added these little extra bits to it, specifically around 1884. And so that's why the after 1884 on it.
That's super cool. I didn't know that about his signature. Wonderful. Well, let's move on to some more abstract things. You picked something that couldn't get more abstract, maybe.
I love that we flipped. It's like you picked the 19th century one and I picked this one. Partly I've always loved this picture. It's 98 by 98. It's 4 individual canvases, just to help you sort of read the image. It's not on white. The white is just the wall it was hanging on. So it's 4 individual canvases that are arranged in a grid. So it's 98 by 98 inches. So it's got an enormous impact on the wall. And it's really hard to photograph her works because the color is so subtle. You can see a little bit in this slide, particularly in the one in the lower right, that there are all sorts of different colors happening in there. They're not just fields of color, but it's harder to tell in the others. Though you'll see it when you see it in person. And Anne is a painter out of Montana who's just always been interested in the natural world, but really elements of it. So she's not trying to do a landscape that looks exactly like a landscape. She's trying to grab some other element. And one of the things she's focused on for a long time is cycles in nature. And she's tracking in this series the colors of the changing plants in different seasons. And I'm a gardener and I love that because I've tried to do that with my own yard and the things that grow in it, is to try and understand, like right now, the things that are blooming are pinks and purples and whites and some yellow. And it's against this sort of brown or yellowed out dry grass that is not blooming or growing at the moment. And I know that as the season moves, the colors in my yard will shift. And I had never really looked at the sort of, I was big on flowers for a long time, but not looking at the plant that was holding the flower. And her works made me really start thinking about like those colors, like when the flower's gone, then you got this other thing sitting there that's not flowering constantly. How does that fit into the rest of things? And those subtle color changes. So I love the work for that. I love the work for the color. I'm a huge Mark Rothko fan. And the things that those subtle pictures of his, where the longer you look, the more happens. She has that same sort of aesthetic. So I love looking at this work. And also it was sort of an inside joke for myself because it's actually the piece that's the title wall piece. And I love that we were talking about deconstructing paintings and this one was already in parts. So it was sort of, fun. But we had this interesting issue with it because it's so subtle. And we have it as the thing you see as you come in. And we left all the walls white everywhere else because we didn't want to, we just wanted a neutral background, but we wanted to do something that set the title section off a bit. So we decided to put a gray behind it. And that was a huge challenge to find what's the right gray that is not going to interfere and start to put some other color into the painting. So hopefully we chose the right one. We'll find out. It looks beautiful to me, but we'll find out.
I can't wait to see it. It was up, it feels like yesterday, but time means nothing now. It was up for her show that we had 2 years ago, a year ago.
3, I think.
3?
Now.
Dang.
Yeah.
Well, she did have a solo show and we pulled this one out and had it up, and I had so many great moments with staff and visitors, because often when I tell people I'm an abstract painter, they go to the least understood abstract painting that they've ever seen and want me to explain it to them, which is fun. Especially when they say it's like, oh, that green and purple Anne Appleby, I don't understand it. What is it? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you, it's incredible. You need to stand an arm length away so that it envelops you, because like you said, it is big. And so if you stand kind of right in it, you're in those colors and they start to hum and vibrate and play off of each other. The upper right green has this little bit of yellow in it that starts to grow and glow, almost like the upper left yellow is taking over. And then if you let the purple glow, you kind of can play with it. And it's just so cool. And you were saying something about how you had a friend who described that, what's happening in your brain when you look at art that way.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a neuroscientist, and he's also an art lover, and he became fascinated with this concept of the aesthetic response. And you and I were talking about that, how you can sometimes come to a certain work and suddenly you'll feel a very particular emotion, or something will sort of, maybe you get excited. I've had some actually, like the hair on the back of my neck will go up, and we both talked about being all emotional and teary with some of them. And it's like, what is that? Why is this thing setting off this sensation in the body? And he's been studying, there are these particular neurons that fire and that keep firing. It's not like a single, like most nerve things. It's like a sort of feedback loop. So that's partly why it maintains, you feel this sort of thing that doesn't go away. It's fascinating, because I've often thought about, like, someone will say, why do you like this painting? And I'll say, well, it makes my eyes feel good. And they're like, what the heck does that mean? It's like, well, I love it. So yeah, it was fascinating to find out there's actually a neurological.
But it's also like, if you walk up to a painting and you don't understand it, just give it a minute. Just stare at it for a minute. Don't let yourself have to make sense of it. Just like feel it for a little bit. We did have a question around this one that was like, how did Anne Appleby apply the paint and wax? So
Yeah.
as far as I know, it's an encaustic technique. Yeah, so you can mix wax and oil together in kind of layers often, and you can get wax of varying colors. And so often, from what I know, you can make an oil painting and put layers of wax and heat them up to get different textures, or a thin, like this one is a thin, calm layer of wax, and it just sort of adds a depth to the painting.
Yeah, and the wax lets light through too, sort of the way, why painters love oil, because the light can kind of fall through that medium and then bounce back up, and she really works off of that, having those layers, those thin layers.
Yeah, and sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's nice and chunky, and wax is a really cool medium that I don't know that a lot of people realize artists use a lot.
It was
That's a
really,
great
really
question.
popular in the Northwest for a while. There was like an encaustic, everybody was working in encaustic. It feels like in the 1990s, it was like everywhere you went, encaustic. It was amazing, the variations, but it was funny that these mediums have their trends and moments too.
I mean, I feel like it's so cold and gray here. We need to heat something over a little, and work with heat in some sort of way is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and we have a comment in the chat. Thank you, Lori. She says she's an artist who does, among other mediums, encaustic, and often the pigment is in the wax layers or added to the wax. So it's sort of replaces oil. If you're using like an oil painting, you're mixing pigment into oil. This is a replacement for that sort of thing.
Exactly. Cool. And then the next one I picked was this Merle Wagner whisk, which is made from steel and rust preventative paints, which I assume are
Rust-Oleum.
Hardware store, Rust-Oleum, that kind of stuff. And the reason I picked this, well, first of all, I love Merle Wagner. Her work is incredible, and she is really kind of underrepresented in the canon of what she's made. She should be kind of more talked about, I think. So it's really cool that we have quite a collection of her work at TAM. And she was born in Tacoma, but she studied at the Art Student League in New York in the 60s, early 60s. And she's mostly abstract work. So of course I love her. A lot of hard edge abstraction, as you can see in this work, with these firm stripes of metal. And she also took a lot of material. So we often think of painting on canvas or linen, stretched, maybe on a board, painted very easily. And Merle Wagner saw stone, steel, parts of different machinery and decided to make them paintings, or make them art, and then we've decided to call them paintings. There's that conversation too, I suppose. But one thing I really loved about this is the color palette, which assumably was chosen because it was what rust preventative paints existed or were around. They feel very industrial, which I am always drawn to. They also feel like colors that came from the rust that's happening on the steel, which I think is I find that fascinating, and like finding those little glimmers of the reds and the greens. And then also all the negative space. So this, what you're seeing that's white on this is the wall. And so the negative space becomes part of the work, really. Like my eye carries the rectangle through, and then we're playing with negative space. And there's a little bit of bend to these materials, so I can't wait to see it in person. It's smaller than I want it to be. I know that much.
Yeah, and then it's all those lines, if people can see those in between the color, but those are actually individual pieces. So it's not even like welded together. Those are individually.
Oh, so it's had to be hung with all those pieces. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What a challenge for our team.
Yeah, it's simpler than others actually, but because it's very straightforward. But yeah, it's a fascinating work.
But yeah, I love her work, and and she's also been super prolific. Tons of work has been made, and I believe she's still continuing to work, and she's like 83, something like that. So just someone I admire and look up to, and hopefully I will be making such incredible work for a long time. But
yeah, she's, like you said, she's a Tacoma native, and her family are one of the old Tacoma families. So their home is now Lakewold Gardens. Their home and gardens was turned over to the city as a gift, decades and decades ago. But she grew up here, and, like you say, studied here. And she ended up, when she went to New York, she ended up marrying Bob Ryman, the abstract minimalist artist. And so it's always interesting, and they always sort of worked alongside each other. He passed away a couple of years ago, but it's fascinating to sort of see the difference between their works. And she's always had that interest in sort of non-traditional support. So if you go to our eMuseum website and look at some of the other works in the collection, and you'll see there's things that are on slate, for example, or that sort of background. We have lots of heavy paintings by Merrill because the supports are so large. But the other thing she's loved all along is sort of like what happens to the surface of a painting over time. And so that interest in rust and rust preventative for this piece. But we know too, she's taken works and like put them outside. She'll paint it and then put it in the backyard and leave it for a couple of years. She's buried things to see what happens if something's buried in the soil and what that might do to it. So I love that sort of interaction of this thing she made and also these forces that are out of her control and what they do to her work.
Well, I think there's a lot of play that has happened around painting since the ab-X movement of like, what can paint be and do? And I think that's just so exciting, because for every artist, there is a new thing that paint can be and do. And it just continues it's a snake eating itself. When I was in grad school, even though I was making deeply abstract paintings, the trend was figurative work. But really, it'll come back around, and something I make will be more trendy than others, and then figurative work will be dead, and no one needs figurative work, and then it'll come back again. And so I think it's really interesting that painting just keeps eating itself.
Well, and I think, like when I was in grad school, I read that decade's round of articles about how painting was dead, and then, painting keeps trucking. And then there's the next generation, like painting's dead and painting keeps trucking. So it's a fascinating medium just for the reinvention. And there's one artist in Oregon, Mel Katz, who's known as a sculptor, but he started out like his career is like that trajectory. Like he's making traditional paintings, oil on canvas frame. Then the frames go. Then the support becomes different. Then they become shaped. And then parts of it start to come off onto the wall. And then he ends up doing full-scale 3D sculpture. But I love that sort of like, he's just slowly playing with that idea that he doesn't have to do the rectangle anymore, that there's a whole other way of thinking about painting.
And your next piece.
So this was my next one. This is Toy Van Vu, a Seattle artist who came here from the East Coast, and I think she's been here about 10 years now. And what I love about this, there are many things I love about this piece. One is that it's watercolor, and that's one of the media I love, and I love to look at, and I love to think about, and I cannot do a thing. It's hard to work with, and you can't correct yourself easily if you make mistakes, which of course I make a lot of. And so anyone who can control it like this and get fine lines and hard edges and give something this sort of industrial feel is really amazing to me, that they can control watercolor that way. And I love that there's not a lot of detail in it either. I mean, it's like it is hard edged and it is realistic, and yet it's not like every little detail. So it's got this sort of beautiful, it's almost like a picture of a sculpture, because she's also cut it off of its moorings. It kind of floats in space, which I love. And I love the viewpoint too, because it's an observation tower, and I know I'm looking at a flat thing, but I feel like I'm doing this, looking up at it, which is great. Because that was the other thing I remember in art school. Perspective was like, my brain could not handle how you make flat things look like they move in space. And I remember this one drawing that the teacher made me redo it like 6 times. I never got it because I couldn't figure out how those lines work. So I love looking at that and trying to see how things are structured. But I've also got this fascination with hard-edged watercolor from the middle part of the 20th century. There's this whole group of painters that are called and it's going right in my head, the precisionist painters, that were fascinated by industrial subjects and wanted things to have that sort of hard-edged industrial feel. And there was one watercolorist in particular out of the Northwest, Vanessa Helder, who did incredible work in that style, and had the great good luck of being able to do a show on her work and really look at her work. And it just made me love it more, and love that somebody could do that very tight, controlled work with it.
Yeah, this one is the use of like line in this one, how your eyes kind of go, for me, I read it looking up at it. So I start at that kind of misty nothing of the feet and go up and around and through, and you sort of follow all those lines as you're walking the stairs with your eyes, all to just start again, which is really interesting with this piece, because if you go up, you're on the observation deck, you're circling around, you come downstairs, and then you just go up again, and it kind of just, your eye keeps going, and that negative space sort of just falls away, which is really interesting.
It's the Escher staircase sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
You're wandering around. That's interesting, because I always go straight to the top part and then work my way down. My eye goes straight to that darker color, and that stronger. But looking at it too, I always feel like this picture has lots and lots of color in it, and it's really this very simple, sort of subtle palette with not a lot of variation technically, but there is.
There's at least 3 different blues in there though, and then maybe some black.
Yeah, or dark gray.
Yeah. I'm interested to see this one in person. We've been stuck at home looking at art online, which is such a joy to be able to do, but it's not the same. Paintings need to be seen. You need to see them in your eyeballs.
Yeah, even just going in and laying out the show, which we've been doing the last couple of weeks, like to get it ready to go. It's been over a year since I've even done that. So it was like, wow, how does this work again? Real art, don't know how to handle things that aren't just a slide on a screen. So yeah, it's great. We'll go stand too close to this one and look at the colors.
We'll scare all the VS staff.
Right.
They know we work there, but like we can't touch it. Is it hung, is this one of the ones that's hung just kind of standard, or, because I know you have two salon hangs in the show, which is really interesting.
Yeah, we have one big salon hang, so the rest of it, so we took the gallery that it's in, because of the way the pre-doc building, you know, you have that ramp that goes up. So the galleries do this kind of very subtle slope upward. And so the wall at the tallest end of this gallery, we turned into a salon wall hang, just because, again, I was being greedy. I wanted to put more paintings out. So we just gave up a wall to do that. So I think there's 16 or 17 more on that wall as well.
It's going to be really exciting to see how how the paintings talk to each other.
Yeah, and I came up with a list and I thought, how are we ever going to make this into a coherent thing? And then handed it off to our head preparator, exhibition designer. And he, of course, like, because he's a painter too. Yeah. So it ended up in this really beautiful format. And then we found out we had one of the pictures of the paintings sideways. And then when we looked at the dimensions, like, wait a minute. And so we had to flip it and then redo all this stuff. And the second version was better than the first. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah, I think it's great. They've got it on the wall. I haven't been in to see it yet. I don't get to see it till this coming week. So I'm curious to see the final.
It's going to be so exciting. Yeah, I love this work. It's just a small, intimate little study of perfection.
Yeah, it really is. That's a beautiful way to say it.
And then I chose this John Matsudara, Busy City, and he is a really cool guy. He worked at Boeing for a long time, and he studied art, but didn't really make it to being a full-time career in art, it seemed like, which is most of us. And he has a wide range of work that you can find, of some basic landscapes, which are good, but I really love his abstract stuff when he kind of lets himself go free a bit. And the way he's using line here is just like so kinetic and so like moving you through. And if it wasn't called Busy City, I would definitely feel that hum of a city at night almost, which is a weird, like, this feels like a nighttime scene to me, even though we have this cream around the edges, which I want to say is not a nighttime color, but it's like pulling you into the frenetic energy of the city. Carol said Pollock in a different form. It definitely has that movement, that energy of mark making. And for me, I just see these colors popping through. We have just your blue, red, yellow, your primary colors, but they're done in such a way that they don't feel childlike, which primary colors often can do. They're done with a real subtlety, and I love this painting, and I can't wait to see it in person again.
And I like that you call that out about the cream around it, because I do always sort of edit that out. It's like I read it almost as if I'm looking through like a window at a scene, and sort of, yeah, that's fascinating. And I hadn't really thought about that in this picture. It's like, why is it that way?
And I didn't even notice it too, because I often am right in the center of it. I'm right in that dark purpley red spot, and then I go out from there. And I wonder if, I mean, we don't really know, but maybe he was painting something he was actually seeing from inside, and it was a bright cream room that he was in painting from, or maybe this was all from memory or sketches. But his work is really interesting. What I found in his abstract work was there is often sort of this like central void, but it's not a void in the same way that the blacks in this painting are. There's often like this central hole for your eye to dive into, and then a lot of energy happening around it, which I love. It feels very of its time too.
Yeah, it's like you look at that and you're like, that is a 1960s
Yeah,
yeah,
like
which I guess is palette, but also the sort of look of it. But yeah, it's very well.
it's
But
that
see,
mid-century modern thin lines and lots of horizontal stuff.
yeah, but see, I also see at the bottom center there's what I read as a figure, and then at the right of the in yellow is also a walking figure. So I see figures in it, and what I love about it too is like bits of buildings, windows. You know, you just sort of the more you look at the layers, the more you see. And I'm really curious that like the moment he's painting this, he's exhibiting at the Zoe Dezan Gallery in Seattle, which was this really important gallery in our art history because she was one of the only ones, one of the few galleries that was there at the time, which is 50s, 60s. I think she went into the early 70s, and showing artists who were doing what was then cutting edge work, and often artists of color that no one else would touch. And so it's this incredible group of people who are working there, but also happening at the same moment. This is the moment, I think, right around or right after when Mark Toby's own work is starting to move from the sort of loose figurative to these very layered pieces, and then eventually goes straight to white writing. But he goes through a whole phase that's sort of like that too, where you have these superimposed layers where you see there's a little figure, there's a little horse, there's a little building there underneath all of this other mark making. So I'm curious about, I would love to know if there was a sort of, they would have both been kind of there around that time. And
I read an article that said that he had met Mark Toby, and Mark Toby gave him some sketches that he like prized for the rest of his life. And so I think there's definitely a dialogue between like the Northwest school, which I think John was a part of, is kind of what they said, and then the mystics, the Mark Toby and his gang or whatever.
Right. Generation one.
Yeah, where it's that frenetic mark making, but it has a very tight, I think like Pollock often used broad swashes with his arm, and you see the long marks. And with the Northwest school, it's often very tight and enclosed.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just like, ooh, it's very cool.
And sort of obsessive. I always get the sort of, with that sort of like, I'm going to keep making marks and marks and marks.
Yeah.
Just calm down.
When to stop.
Yeah. 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 The old question, how do you know it's done?
You don't. When it leaves your studio and you can't touch it anymore.
I'm going to put her name. There's a great history of the gallery out there, and the other artists, and some great photos from the 50s and early 60s of people at openings. So get some of these names. But Zoe Dezan, her gallery.
That's awesome, because that really is like, you can't say that lightly enough, that for a gallerist at that time to be showing this work and of people of color, and it just wasn't happening.
Yeah. And a woman running the gallery too, it's that moment in time. So it's really
pretty cool.
Kind of incredible. And it's just probably the last 10 years, maybe even less, I guess 10, that she's been getting any real attention, and people have been doing the history and uncovering all of this. But
pays to keep photos and documentation of stuff, even when you think it's not going anywhere.
Well, and it's interesting because it's shifting the dialogue about the mystics. So we're talking about the four big names, like Toby, Graves, Anderson, and Callahan, who were called the mystics after this big article about them and their work, and felt like they were carrying this Northwest aesthetic forward. But they always talk about them bringing Asian influences into their work and building it in. But there's never any discussion of where necessarily like others influencing them the other direction. It's always them influencing everyone else. So now we're finding out they have these ongoing relationships with a number of Japanese American artists who are in Seattle, and that it's much more of a dialogue that is not them teaching everyone else. There's actually some back and forth. So yeah, great. The more we cover, the better we get it.
And Dale has a question about the large dark shapes at the center. Could they be cloud shadows? He's not sure that this is a night piece. I think they could be. We don't really know. It's to each their own interpretation. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Christina said earlier, it reminded her of a John Marin of Brooklyn, and it is that same idea of like, how do you capture the image of a city in a painting a thing that's standing still, that's, you know, flat technically, you know, how do you feel that in the work, and not using crazy color, because the painting we're about to look at has a lot of crazy color to bring that energy, whereas this one, it's like you say, it's all about those marks.
Yeah. Speaking of the next one.
Yeah, oh, it's one of my favorites. They're all favorites, but I love this one, partly because it's the, you know, it's the 1930s and 40s, which is my favorite moment in time. But yeah, so Virginia Banks is really another one of those kind of unappreciated Northwest artists who came here from the East Coast because her husband got a job out here and they moved out here, and then she just becomes part of this whole circle of artists out in the Northwest. And she was, as you can see, if you know any art history at all, you can see that she's fascinated by movements like Cubism, and that idea that a single picture can hold multiple viewpoints in a single space. So I love looking at this one because 1 minute it looks flat, and then I look at another section and I think, oh wait, that's the corner of something, and then something else is poking into it that says, no, that can't be a corner, that's got to be something else. I love the kind of back and forth in this picture. And I love the color of it, and how she's used this bright, lively color, some of which almost clashes with each other so that you get that energy. And that even parts of them appear to be cut out, like the big orange one on the left, and so you can see the wall behind. But that seems crazy. It's like you can tell they're musical instruments, and what musical instrument looks like that if it was cut out? And so that back and forth, I just love it. And is it because you're seeing it from a different angle, or so I got fascinated. I thought, well, to me, my brain, these should be, it's a still life of musical instruments. It's the 1940s, so everything should probably be like brown wood. Instead, they've got these crazy colors. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. So I went researching the history of the early electric guitar just to see. And there are some early electric guitars by this period in time, but it's not all the crazy colors and materials and things that I'm aware of. I mean, someone who knows it better could probably tell me different. But so yeah, there's that. And then I'm fascinated by still lifes. I've done a lot with still lifes. I've done a lot with still life shows, but they've usually been that much more realistic way of painting them. And so I love that this is technically a still life of musical instruments, but it has all this crazy energy. Excuse me.
Yeah, I love this painting. It's funny, actually, all the paintings you chose were ones were on my list too. So when I saw your list, I was just like, yay, we get to talk about all the things.
It's super great on the wall too. It's like, it is just as wonderful in person. It's like you walk into that part of the gallery, you can see it, and it's just like so joyful. It's like a really joyful work when you look at it.
It is, and yet they're all broken. Like, so it's this weird duality of like, these things are broken. The color is giving you so much joy. But what is even, and yeah, like, what is that reddish instrument on the side that almost has like a egg on fire in the middle?
I know, what is that?
The rest of them I can kind of see how they could be some sort of instrument, but that one I have no idea.
Yeah, I love Dale. Dale just said after he sees this, he's going to watch a Fellini movie tonight. And I think it's definitely got that sort of funhouse thing going.
Well, and
the shadow. Look at the shadow on the right hand wall. It's like, what is that coming from? You know, like, what's throwing that shadow? Because there's not like a clear corresponding shape to it, which is great.
And then just I can't wait to see the texture in person, because I'm assuming that a lot of those brush strokes, like in the upper right corner with the red and the blue, where it almost looks like bricks, that's got to have some texture versus like what we're seeing on a flat screen. So I can't wait to see
pretty
that.
Smooth. It'll probably surprise you. It's pretty smooth. It's not like, there's not a lot of heavy impasto on it. But what I like about it too is like I always read the colors as pretty big blocks of color. And then when I start to look at them, I see that there's a lot more going on within each of those blocks, so-called blocks of color. So yeah, it's just a fun painting to look at and to like I say, it is joyful, which again, is one of those, like, that's a crazy thing to say about a picture, but that's what it makes you feel. It's just so playful and fun and full of life as a picture, which of course, you know, it's a still life, but it's not still too, which I love about it. See, someone, Leslie, saying the piece on the bottom, the floor question mark, looks like maybe it's a broken piece off the unusual orange instrument. And maybe these are instruments indigenous to other cultures. That's interesting.
That's
Someone
true.
said mandolin too, but I don't know which piece they were talking about.
I don't know. One thing I love about this too is it does look like such a simple, like, oh, everything's symmetrical, but it's not.
Huh.
We have this like horizon line towards the bottom of a desk or a work spot station, but the instrument in the middle has that line going at a slight diagonal. So it's not quite symmetrical, but things are so balanced with the shadow giving that mandolin on the right more weight so that it balances with that red, maybe mandolin. And yet they're all hanging too, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, Jamie just noted, it's like, it reminds me of cartoon matte paintings from the 40s, like Tom and Jerry.
Totally.
It's definitely that feel. There is a cartoon sort of, which is probably, you know, those that know me know I have this weird animation obsession. So that's probably another reason I love this piece, is that it does feel like one of those cartoons.
Well, they're so stylized that they do look like they might just come to life and start singing.
Yes, it's very Beauty and the Beast, isn't it? It's like the teapot in a minute is going to get up and start singing Be Our Guest. Yeah, I love this picture. Great
It's
fun.
so good.
And endless fun things to discover in it. You can stand in front of it and talk with people about it, on and on and on. I'm looking forward to when kids can come back in the museum and talk about this picture, because I would love to know what kids see in this image.
I would love to do some like line yoga with kids on this one too, where we make them move their bodies in the way that they see, like find shapes with. That's always fun.
Yeah.
The piece on the floor looks like it could have come from the piece on the left. It absolutely does.
Ah, yeah, good point.
Well, as we're running out of time, but that's okay.
We got to look at the last two. We got to look at least at the pink one.
Let's try this again.
Backing up, backing up.
Play slideshow in window. Nope. Did we lose it? We lost it. Let's try this again. Sorry, y'all. Here we go. We're back. Okay. My last piece
There you go.
that I am the most excited about, because Margie Livingston is a bit of a hero to me. Her work is so cool, and this was one of the newest pieces we have, right? Wasn't this a recent acquisition?
Yeah, just end of December.
So excited. We have this pink, which I hate to admit that this is millennial pink now. Apparently that's a thing. They've taken my favorite color to use, and that's fine. But this work, I think, really speaks to the idea of what paint can do and what you think paint can't do, and then an artist proving to you that it can do that. So this is acrylic paint and string, and it's whacked grid. And I was looking at her website, which I highly recommend for anyone that gets excited about this work. And she has continually her own work has fed her new work. So she has done paintings that are like still lives from sculptures that then later she creates out of paint, and then does paintings of that, traditional paintings of them. And then somewhere along the line, she started doing these grid works based on a grid of string that she set up in her studio and painted, and used that as her model. And then that turned into these, where she would dip the string in paint repeatedly and model them to these shapes. And it's bigger than I thought it was going to be. And Margaret shared with me earlier that last line on the dimensions, it's 17 inches off the wall, which is remarkable and exciting for me. One thing, when you look at this, you can see the history of the layers. If you zoom really far in, which you can do on the exhibition website, to look at where she snipped some of the string coming out at you, and it looks like the rings of a tree with how many layers of paint are on there. You can see that it was white at some point, it had some red. This is really playing with what paint can be and the bounds of like painting and sculpture and how often they are the same thing. I think we have this listed in E-Museum as a sculpture, which is amazing. But yeah, I love this so much and I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I've always loved her work because that evolution you're talking about, and there was one series where she just was working with paint, taking acrylic paint and then folding it and bending it and then letting it dry in the shape. So she created this whole series of sculptures that were just layers of acrylic paint, and they're beautiful and they're sort of crazy wonderful. We have another piece by her that's just a drip, that she essentially dripped paint in this long, let it just do its thing and then dry. And we rubber cement it to the wall. It's just this flat piece of paint. And then you peel it off, and put it away in storage. It's, yeah, fascinating. And I love that she's walking that line between painting and sculpture. That was fun that you told me that. I'll go double classify that one because I feel like this one definitely crosses the line. And I love that the sort of, I don't like pink. It hurts my eyes. I've never liked the color pink. And so I love it when people do grungy things to it. So I love that it's sort of grungy pink. I can get into that. And that it's just that the weight of the paint makes it feel sort of, it's been sort of, I don't know. It's
been
grungy
through
or
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use pink because I hate it.
Oh, interesting.
So I've used it for really personal reasons where it's like associated with a really not great memory, but no one else needs to know that. And so then they look at the work and they're like, oh, it's so happy. I was like,
no,
it's not. And so I kind of love it when other artists use it because I feel like this is like, it's an in joke, like, oh, you're using that pink too. You probably don't love it the way like a little girl would love pink, right? There's always that kind of binary female association with it too, which is annoying. And I feel based on the rest of her work, I think she's using it in a much smarter way than just like, oh, it's just the pink that's everywhere.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier when we were preparing for this presentation about how she's also been doing this work where she paints something and then she attaches it to her body and walks out into the landscape with it and drags it behind her. And she's done it through city streets. She's done it through rural areas, all this sort of stuff. And then lets what happens to the surface of it become part of the piece, which is fascinating. So that process of it feels like Mara Wagner's, what we're talking about with Mara Wagner, that's
Yeah.
What happens to your work when you put it out in the world, kind of out of your control.
Yeah, well, and even she's so controlled with what she can do with paint in a lot of the other ways, whereas there are other artists who use paint similarly that let paint get out of control and not control it. And she's just incredible. And you can see it for a long time. I don't know if it's still up, but you could see the video of her doing that performance dragging work at SAM in their galleries. Not sure if it's still up, but it's very cool.
There's a couple of them. There's one of her out on the streets of Seattle, near her studio, dragging things and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well worth visiting her website and just seeing what she's up to. She's really, really pushing the whole concept of painting and what it can be, and continues to do so. I mean, she isn't sort of repeating the same thing over and over. Yeah.
It's just
I wanted to know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I was just going to note that a couple of people have mentioned that they're having issues with the larger photo of this one and the Grafton Tyler Brown. And yeah, unfortunately, we're having some sort of weird tech issue with our online database and these images. so that you can see them, but they've got that sort of title card over them. And then if you click to go to the bigger image, you come up with nothing. So we're working to fix that. But I'll note that with both of these, if you want to kind of see them bigger and look at them, they're both featured on pages within that microsite for the exhibition. So you can at least see the whole thing there. So sorry about that. And we're working on it.
We're working on it. We are running a little late, but I think we can spare some time if everyone will bear with us so that we can talk about Margaret's last pick.
Well, I wanted to note Carol's comment too, when she's talking about her nephew who loved pink as a child, and how gender's been attached to color is it is a fascinating thing. I think that's partly why I hate pink, because I had a lot of pressure as a child and as a young woman to be more feminine. And that was always one of those things was being pushed on me all the time, that and light yellow. So there's a real thing, you know, with those things. No, I will not. So anyway, nobody needed to know that.
I love it.
The last work we had on our list was my last pick. And I love this picture for all sorts of reasons. One is I love that overall, the all over pattern that just goes right out to the edges of the piece. I love that these sort of little squares that are in there are all tilted to the side. So, you know, I mentioned at the beginning, I have a very symmetrical brain. And so I spend all the time I'm looking at this picture, I'm trying to like turn it sideways. It's like, it's an actual physical sensation where I'm trying to like straighten it out, which I think is great fun. And I like that she's got, you know, she's used like some metal leaf and some stamping. So there is a lot of texture to this picture that you can't see in a slide, that where she's stamped into paint almost like she's taken like you do with a wax seal or something. You kind of push some things in, she's kind of cut through, and there's lots and lots of little discoveries in it as you're looking at it. Again, hard to see in this setting, but you'll see when you get to it, there's letters in there in spots and other little things happening. So yeah, there's something about it. I have just really loved that kind of busyness of it and how endlessly you can look at it and find new things with it.
I just noticed the blue. I had never noticed there's a little pop
Over there in the upper left, you mean?
upper left, and there's a little bit in sort of the middle bottom.
Huh, I never noticed that either.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
This
It reads very like red and cream and gray to me. So that's funny what colors stand out for different people.
Well, and I'm always going to try to find every color everywhere because that's just the way my brain works. So like now I'm finding this like green. It's just green.
Well, and even just the different, like this one's in the techniques section, if I remember right. And I was just fascinated by all the different ways the medium's been applied in it too. If you look at it, you know, there's smooth areas, there's areas, like I say, where she's been cutting or dragging through it, or maybe there's a brush, maybe there's a palette knife, maybe there's something else entirely I'm not even imagining. You know, I love that too, that variation all across the piece.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it in person because then I can get really close and be like, oh, she used the back of her brush to drag through wet paint, or did she cut it with like a linoleum cutter? And I think being able to see the metallic is really going to bring it to life a little bit.
Yeah, and that's unexpected in it, because when I looked at the pictures of it, I thought, what metal leaf? Where is their metal leaf? And when you do see it in person, it's subtle. It's not like it suddenly sparkles like you're in Vegas or something, but there is definitely this wonderful sort of metallic element to it. And you're gonna have to take it off the screen soon, because I'm trying to, my brain is doing that thing.
Your brain is like, how can we do this? Yeah,
Dale, but also challenging to look at.
Dale has that slant, kind of reminds him of like a skirt or fabric, like it lends itself to being not a painting.
Interesting. I need to ask Laura. I've only been very briefly in touch with her, but I need to follow up and ask her about the piece and what she was thinking. She's doing, it's funny, she's doing very different work now. She's down in LA, if I remember right, somewhere in California, and completely different. So it's fun to kind of look people up. We did have, there's a resources page attached to the microsite where we put in anywhere we could find an artist's website. And for the ones who are deceased and long before the web existed. You know, if there's a good page about them somewhere that's really well researched or has good background info, we linked that. But there's also a lot of videos out there now of artists at work, and we put those on the links too. So if you just want to kind of follow out a favorite one you've seen, we've tried to make those easy to find for you. Now, someone else mentioned it reminds me of a crazy quilt.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing because we've reached the end of our time. But if anyone has any questions and you want to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, we can stick around for a little bit. But we want to thank all of you for being with us today. And hopefully you can get to the art museum after April 16th. Because we will be open and the show will see the light of day, which is going to be awesome. And we want to thank our friends in marketing who created the wonderful microsite of the virtual show, because that held us together for a little while here. And now we're excited to see it live. So come to TAM after April 16th. Thank you, everyone.
In the question, I see, oh, there are comments.
There are comments.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thanks for the kind remarks, everybody. It's good. People like us being geeks about stuff. I guess we could do this again. We could take it on the road, right?
How geeky could we get? I guess it worked.
What's the next medium we have to get into, right?
Probably glass.
True.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Someone asked, are there other videos online to watch on programs like this? This was kind of the first program of just two of us gabbing that we have, but you can see all of our other talks and lectures from more recently on our YouTube page, the Tacoma Art Museum YouTube. We plan on doing this again, probably, since it was well received. And so let us know. I'm going to send out a survey later tonight. If you guys can take a moment to just fill that out and let us know what you liked. Let us know that you want to see more of this so that we can program more. And I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.